Welcome to Betrayal and Revenge. I'm your storyteller, and today I'll take you on a journey of secrets, lies, and payback. Make sure you stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss how it all unfolds. And when it's over, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. The first time she accused me of cheating, we were sitting in the car outside her mother's house. Rain tapping the windshield like impatient fingers, headlights smeared across the wet glass. She looked at me like I was something foreign, something guilty. No warmth in her voice. No doubt either. "Who's Mia?" I blinked. "Who?" "Mia. The one who texts you smiley faces after 10 p.m. My mind raced. Then landed. She's from work. She's in the sales team. Her boyfriend works in the same office. You didn't answer the question," she said, staring straight ahead. "Why is she texting you?" I almost laughed. Almost. But her silence wasn't curious. It was building something, a wall between us that I hadn't realized she'd already started constructing. "Because we talk. It's harmless. That's what men say when they're about to destroy everything." I looked at her then. The shape of her jaw clenched tight, her hands wrung together in her lap, and something colder than the weather crept into my chest. I wanted to say "you know me." But I didn't. Because she didn't look like she did. Instead, she got out of the car, slammed the door, and disappeared into the rain. At the time, I thought it was a flare of insecurity. A misunderstanding. Something to untangle with patience and love. I didn't know then that it was her opening move. A move she'd planned. A move designed to make me doubt myself. Because nothing masks betrayal better than being the first to accuse. The accusations didn't stop. They multiplied like mold in the corners of our life, quiet at first, then unmistakable, then impossible to ignore. One evening she stood in the doorway of the bathroom while I brushed my teeth and demanded to know why my phone was face down on the counter. Another night she waited until I'd drifted to sleep, then shook me awake, thrusting the screen in my face, a notification from a group chat I hadn't opened in weeks. "You silence the alerts so I won't see them," she hissed. "It's a fantasy football thread," I mumbled, still half dreaming. "At midnight?" I sat up, heart pounding, trying to calibrate reality. She stared as if ready to catalog every flicker of guilt. When I reached for the phone to show her the inane messages, injury updates, trash talk, meme links, she yanked it back. "Liars get no proof," she said. Then she walked out, clutching the phone like evidence, and leaving me in the dark with my mouth still open, the defense never spoken. The pattern calcified. Each morning arrived with a new inquisition. "Who liked your post? Why did a coworker tag you in that photo? Why does your GPS say you took the Riverside exit yesterday when you said traffic was bad on Elm?" At first I over-explained. I screen-shared location histories, dredged up email chains, invited her to scroll entire text threads. It never helped. Proof only fed her suspicion. Every fact became a fragment she reassembled into a different picture, one where I was always at the center of betrayal. Weekends became interrogations. Car rides turned into deposition chambers. She installed a tracker on our shared tablet. "For family safety." Then asked why my route home took 9 minutes longer than Google predicted. I stared at the blinking blue dot she waved in front of me and wondered when love had been replaced by doxing in our own house. Friends noticed first. I began arriving late to after-work drinks, phone glued to my palm, responding to her rapid-fire texts. "Where are you now? Who's there? Send a photo." Guys joked about it. "Does she think you're a spy?" I laughed, brittle and hollow. Because how could I explain that the woman who once trusted me with her heartbeat now monitored it like a parole officer? Inside me, something shifted, a low, constant hum of distrust, not toward her accusations, but toward the origin of them. Accusation without evidence felt less like fear and more like projection. Each time she painted me the villain, I caught a glimpse of guilt flashing behind her eyes, the kind that isn't born from doubt, but from knowledge. I started listening differently. Cataloging slips in her timeline. The work dinners, that changed locations mid-sentence. The phone calls she took in the garage where Wi-Fi couldn't sync to our network logs. The gym bag that came home untouched yet somehow heavier. She accused me of secrets so loudly that, for a while, I forgot to notice hers. Until the night the roles reversed. She borrowed my car. Because the check engine light in hers came on. I drove her dusty sedan to work the next morning, flipped the visor down, and an unfamiliar key slid into my lap, metal, freshly cut, tagged with a cheap plastic label that read Unit 3C. We didn't own storage, and her office had no unit numbers. My pulse thumped in my ears. At lunch I traced it. A downtown loft building by the river, rented corporate apartments marketed to traveling consultants. I parked outside and stared at the brick facade, heart pounding with the adrenaline her own accusations had taught me. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. The time-stamped parking receipts I later pulled from her glove box told enough. Tuesday evenings, Thursday lunches, a pattern too neat to be accidental. Driving home I realized the symmetry. While she demanded alibis, she was perfecting her own. While she audited my routes, she mapped detours of her own. The relentless questioning wasn't insecurity, it was smoke. And I had inhaled it willingly, coughing out confessions for crimes I never committed while she walked through the fire unseen. That night, when she asked why I was quiet, I smiled, small, measured, new. A smile she didn't recognize. Just tired, I said. And I was. Tired of defending a truth that never mattered to her. Tired of believing accusations born from her own guilt. But beneath the fatigue another feeling unfurled, clarity. I finally understood her strategy. And for the first time since those raindrops drummed on the windshield outside her mother's house, I felt the balance shift. She thought she was writing a story where I played the unfaithful husband. She never imagined I'd read ahead and find the chapter where her betrayal was already in print. From that moment on, I stopped trying to clear my name. No more explanations, no more proof, no more long messages typed under dim kitchen lights trying to defend my innocence to someone who had already decided I was guilty. The trial was over, and the verdict had always been a decoy. Instead, I listened closely to the hesitation in her voice when she said she'd be working late again, to the way her hand hovered just a second too long over her phone before flipping it face down. I watched the shifts in her habits, the newly painted nails even though she was just staying home, the sudden interest in yoga classes she never attended, the perfume that lingered in the hallway when she returned late and breathless, her eyes darting like a girl still caught in the fantasy of not being caught. She thought she was subtle. That projection would protect her. That if she kept the spotlight on me, no one would notice the shadows behind her. But she forgot something. I'd once loved her deeply. And that kind of love teaches you everything. How she lies, how she moves, how she breathes when she's happy, and how she breathes when she's terrified of being found out. So I did what she never expected. I apologized more. Grew even quieter. Gave her the illusion of a man who was broken down, unsure of himself, eager to win her trust again. I played my part well. I kept my voice low, my questions gentle, my presence calm. All the while I gathered screenshots of messages she thought she'd deleted. Traffic cam stills showing her car parked 3 blocks from the apartment tied to Unit 3C. Credit card charges disguised as wellness retreats that were, in fact, weekend rentals in cities I knew she never traveled to for work. I never confronted her. Because she wasn't looking for truth. She was building a narrative, one where she got to cheat and still be the wounded wife. One where my imagined betrayal justified hers. She wanted me to break down, lash out, give her the ending she rehearsed in the mirror. But I denied her the script. Instead, I smiled more. Held her hand in public. Whispered apologies I didn't mean. And every time she looked at me with those eyes that used to melt me, now full of performance and guilt, I smiled deeper. Because I knew. And she didn't know I knew. Not yet. But she would. Soon. Not in anger. Not in violence. But in silence sharp enough to slice through the web she wove. The moment was coming. I wasn't going to expose her in rage. I was going to disappear so completely, so cleanly, so quietly that her story would collapse without a villain to anchor it. And when that day came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't scream or curse. I'd simply leave a note. And in that silence, she'd finally hear the truth. She was never protecting our love. She was protecting her lie. And she'd done it so loudly, so obsessively, that she never saw me let go. She started to think she'd won. There was a lightness in her walk again, like guilt had turned to glitter in her chest. She hummed when cooking breakfast, wore lipstick for no reason, tossed casual questions over her shoulder with an air of effortlessness that hadn't touched our marriage in over a year. The girl I fell in love with had returned, but only in surface and shape, not soul. Because now, every movement had a rhythm I recognized from before the storm. Only this time, I could hear the thunder behind it. She was rehearsing innocence. The mornings were her stage. She'd rise early, brew coffee with a smile, lay my favorite mug beside the paper like a wife still in love. I'd return the favor with warm hands on her waist, kisses to her neck, whispers of gratitude for being patient with me. "I know I've been hard lately," I'd murmur, letting my lips barely brush her skin. "But I'm working on it." She ate it up. Of course she did. Because it confirmed her illusion, that I was weak, insecure, paranoid. That her accusations had reshaped me. That the man standing before her was still tangled in guilt, desperately trying to reclaim her trust. She didn't realize it wasn't trust one wanted, it was time. Time to watch. Time to prepare. And most of all, time to make her underestimate me. The lies were still there. I saw them flicker in her eyes when she glanced at her phone mid-conversation, in the way her voice faltered when I asked, offhandedly, "How was yoga?" And she took just a second too long to answer. I learned the names of the restaurants she claimed to be at, and quietly called them from burner numbers just to confirm reservations never existed. I tracked her digital trail across booking sites, caught the patterns in her passwords, the recycled excuses she spun to friends, to me, to herself. What she didn't know was that I'd already taken her phone one night while she slept, just long enough to mirror the cloud backups. I didn't need to snoop anymore. Everything she erased still lived in my pocket. Every photo, every thread, every calendar entry she thought she'd hidden from the world, mine now. Quiet, cold evidence. And yet I didn't feel the thrill of power. I felt something deeper, detachment. The same way a surgeon cuts without trembling, knowing the pain will come later, for someone else. She kissed me one afternoon before leaving for her volunteer meeting. Her lips lingered, sweet, like they once did when we were dating. She tilted her head with that old smirk, the one that used to melt me. And for a brief moment, I wondered if she remembered who I was before all this, before her lies twisted us into something unrecognizable. But then she picked up her purse, and as she turned, I saw the flash of that silver key fob. Unit 3C. Still on her ring. And just like that, the illusion cracked again. When the door clicked shut behind her, I didn't sit down. I didn't scroll or distract myself. I walked straight to the drawer where she kept her backup phone, the one she thought I didn't know about, buried beneath winter scarves. I turned it on. And waited for it to breathe. Because in that moment, I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was confirming something deeper, that she still believed I was blind. That her performance was airtight. That the fog she built around me still held. But she had no idea. The fog was gone. And I was wide awake inside her script. That burner phone was a museum of her arrogance. There were no love notes. No grand declarations. No "I miss yous" that could pass for passion. Only logistics. Cold, efficient rendezvous scheduled between errands, hotel check-ins listed like dentist appointments, emoji-laced conversations that made it clear this wasn't about love. It was about escape. She had built an alternate version of herself, one that lived in brief flashes between school pickups and dinner prep. She had a tone I didn't recognize, flirty, carefree, vulgar in ways she'd once reserved only for me. And now I watched her use it like a borrowed costume, putting it on and taking it off at will, like nothing in it belonged to anyone. She had another voice. And I had another reason. That afternoon I began the first move. Small. Subtle. I started clearing out my side of the shared digital life. I exported documents, changed cloud passwords, removed my face from Face ID on our shared devices. Nothing loud. Just quiet disconnections that she'd never notice until the wires were already cut. Then I called a lawyer. Not for a divorce. Not yet. I wanted to know things, what she'd be entitled to, what she wouldn't, what counted as evidence, what wouldn't. The man on the other end of the line had the calm of someone who had heard these stories too many times. When I mentioned infidelity, he said two words that redefined my approach. Prove intent. Not just actions, but why she did it. Why she concealed it. What she stood to gain. That's what would matter. Not just the affair, but the architecture of it. So I began tracing that structure. Bank statements. Hidden accounts. Transfers to names I didn't recognize. A Venmo transaction labeled dog food that turned out to be a boutique hotel bar in another city. Receipts for lingerie charged to a card I didn't know she had. And then came the real crack, a digital note buried in her phone's Files app titled Exit Plan. I opened it. And read the bullet points. Talk to Katie about subletting her guest house. Open separate savings account at Fulton Branch. Get copy of prenup from Dad's files. Delete backups before October. Push narrative. He's not the man I married. I didn't breathe for a full minute. I read it again, and again, and again. The date on the file was 5 weeks old. She'd written it after her second round of accusations, the week she claimed she wanted to reconnect. That same week she made love to me like we were 19 again. The same week she'd cried into my shoulder and told me, I don't want to lose us. All a lie. All a play. I wasn't her safety net. I was her alibi. She wasn't trying to fix us, she was setting the stage to leave me as the broken one. The untrustworthy one. The unstable husband. She was crafting her out before she even faked coming back in. And I'd almost believed her. But now, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt focused. She wanted to burn the house down and blame me for the ashes. I'd let her. But I'd be the one holding the matchbox. That night, when she came home smelling like hotel soap and mint gum, I kissed her hand. Looked her in the eyes. You're glowing, I said. She smiled, like someone who had no idea her entire plan had just turned inside out. Because I didn't need to scream. I just needed to wait. A little longer. Let her lean all the way in. And when she finally made her move, I'd be 10 steps ahead. And watching the trap close in velvet silence. The more she thought I was breaking, the more reckless she became. She started slipping. Not because she was careless, but because she believed she'd already won. That's the thing about liars. They get addicted to the performance. To the rush of convincing someone. To the power of rewriting truth in real time and watching you nod along. And once they think you've swallowed it whole, they stop looking over their shoulder. She didn't notice that I'd started setting traps. Not the kind you step into. The kind that watch you. I placed a tiny voice-activated recorder behind the living room bookshelf. Another in the glove compartment of her car. Nothing illegal. Nothing intrusive. Just quiet ears, ears that belonged to me. And they caught everything. One morning, I listened to a conversation she had on speaker while she curled her hair in our bathroom. It was her sister. A soft voice on the other end asked, So, when are you telling him? And my wife laughed. When I'm ready. He's still in that guilt spiral. It's perfect. He thinks I'm mad at him for some random chick at work. Meanwhile, I've got options. My hand didn't shake. My jaw didn't tighten. I just kept listening. Because she had just handed me the script. Later that week, she texted to say she was stuck at a planning committee meeting for an event I knew didn't exist. I sent back, no worries. Grab dinner after? I'll wait up. I wasn't waiting. I was already parked across from Unit 3C. She never saw me. But I saw her. Hair done. heels too high for a meeting. Walking like a woman who'd already forgotten what it felt like to be caught. I watched her greet him in the doorway, casual, like this was routine. Their hands touched. Her body leaned into his with the kind of muscle memory that comes from repetition, not regret. And still, I didn't move. I just took the photo. One single shot. Clear. Framed. Time-stamped. But I didn't send it to her. Not yet. Instead, I went home, printed it, and slid it into a plain white envelope. I placed it in my desk drawer, next to copies of the exit plan, the audio files, the text logs, the financial trail she'd worked so hard to hide. Evidence wasn't my goal. Precision was. I wanted her to fall right into her own narrative, believing she had full control, right up until the last second, when the floor dropped. So I waited. Waited for her to pick a fight. Waited for her to play the same song again, the accusations, the theatrics, the desperate, rehearsed heartbreak. It came sooner than I expected. 3 nights later, she slammed the door after work and threw her bag on the table like a gavel. You were at the gym again? Yeah. Why? Funny. Because Kyle's girlfriend said she saw you leaving early with your phone in your hand and a weird look on your face. Kyle's girlfriend didn't know my name. You think I'm hiding something? I asked calmly. She didn't blink. I know you are. The trap was closing. And she was racing toward it. I stood slowly, met her eyes across the room. I saw the fire in them, the hunger for drama, the eagerness to twist this into another session where I'd grovel, apologize, confess to sins I'd never committed. But this time, I didn't flinch. I just said, "Maybe you should sit down." She laughed. Rolled her eyes. Why? You have some big confession? No, I said. You do. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope. She didn't open it at first. She just stared, arms locked across her chest, jaw clenched, waiting for me to blink, to flinch, to fumble. When I didn't, curiosity cracked through anger. She snatched the envelope from my hand, tore the flap, then froze. A single photo. One image, her body arched against another man's doorway, lips inches from his, key fob for Unit 3C sparkling under the hall lamp. No date stamp, no accusation printed beneath. Just proof, clean as cut glass. Her breath caught. Eyes flicked to me, searching for outrage. There was none. I sat down, folded my hands, and let the hush settle thick between us. She looked back at the photo as if staring harder might change its story. You were following me, she whispered. Not a question, an indictment. Anything to pivot blame. I shrugged. I went for a drive. She opened her mouth, closed it. The fury she expected me to hurl never came. Without it, her script collapsed. She tried a different line, tears. Shoulders trembled, bottom lip quivered, the performance she'd perfected for every confrontation. But tears need a witness who cares, and caring was no longer in my repertoire. Say something, she begged. I spoke softly, each word measured like a surgeon's incision. I just want the truth. Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Streetlights carved thin bars across the floor. She looked so small inside the stillness, an actress after curtain call discovering the seats are empty. It's not what it looks like, she managed. I let the sentence rot in the air. She tried again. He means nothing. I was lonely. You were distant. I thought you were cheating. I raised one hand. The apology died mid-breath. You accused me first, I said, voice even. Every day. Every hour. Why? Her gaze slid to the floor. Because confession invites consequence, and she'd built a life on evading both. Fear, she whispered. I thought if I attacked first, you'd defend. Stay present. I was losing you. I leaned forward, elbows on knees. You didn't lose me. You led me to the door. The truth hit her harder than the photo. Shoulders sagged. She reached, instinct, desperation, for my knee, but I stood, stepped back, left her hand hovering in empty space. "What now?" she asked, voice cracking. "Now?" I echoed. "Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No police. No public shame." Relief flickered, too soon. "Tomorrow you'll meet with my lawyer," I continued. "There's a separation agreement awaiting your signature. You'll keep your car, the personal savings in your name, and the condo lease if you want it. I'll keep the house, the investments, and my peace." She shook her head like a child refusing medicine. "You can't just decide." "I'm not deciding," I said. "I'm offering. The alternative is litigation. I'd prefer quiet." Her eyes darted to the envelope, realizing it was only the first exhibit. "You'd ruin me. You ruined yourself. I'm giving you a door that doesn't slam." Tears fell then, real ones. But tears are currency, and she'd bankrupted that account months ago. She folded inward, clutching the photo to her chest as if hiding it could make it disappear. I walked to the doorway, paused. "One last thing," I said, turning. "No more accusations. To anyone. Ever. The next lie you tell about me, I release everything. Texts, audio, the exit plan, publicly. We both know how that plays out." She nodded without lifting her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed her, and it meant nothing. Sorry is the echo left when truth has vacated the room. I left then, no slamming door, no final glare. Just quiet footsteps down a hall already stripped of trust. In the driveway, night air tasted of rain and freedom. I started the engine, watched lights bloom across the dashboard, felt the world tilt toward morning. Inside the house she once ruled, an envelope lay open, bleeding silence into every corner. And for the first time since her accusations began, she had no one left to blame but the woman in the photograph. The next morning, the sun rose like nothing had burned the night before. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. Some kinds of clarity work better than rest. I sat in the kitchen alone, sipping coffee from the mug she used to pretend was his favorite, and watched light roll across the floor like a silent truth. She didn't come downstairs. I didn't call her name. We existed in the same house as strangers, but only one of us knew it wasn't temporary. At 9:17 a.m., her phone buzzed once. A text from me. "Meeting at 11 o'clock. Office of Russell and Avery. Your name's on the sign-in list." I didn't wait for a reply. By 10:30 I was already there, seated across from my attorney, calm, clean-shaven, in a shirt she once gifted me for our anniversary. Symbolism always tastes better when you serve it cold. When she arrived, she looked like she'd stepped out of a courtroom drama, sunglasses too large, coat too long, tension pulling her spine upright like wire. But her eyes, when they met mine across the conference room table, betrayed her. She expected rage. Instead, she got protocol. "This is standard," my attorney said smoothly, sliding papers across the table. "Mr. Callahan's offering amicable division. It avoids the courts. It protects reputations. It lets you both move forward quietly." She scanned the document with shaking hands. Her voice was low, uncertain. "And if I don't sign?" The attorney didn't flinch. "Then we proceed formally. Discovery phase begins. Digital records. Witness depositions. Financial tracing. Including communications with third parties. Translation. We will open you up and let the truth bleed in public." She blinked fast, lips tightening. No rebuttal came. Just silence, then a slow nod. She signed. Initialed. Signed again. The pen left ink trails like apologies she didn't say aloud. As we left the building, she reached for me, not to touch, but to hover, as if proximity could heal the fracture. Her voice was a brittle whisper. "Do you hate me?" I considered that. "No," I said honestly. "But I stopped loving you the night you smiled after calling me a liar." She winced. "I never meant for it to go that far." "But you rehearsed it, didn't you?" She didn't answer. I didn't wait. We walked to our cars in separate directions, two parallel lines finally breaking apart. I didn't look back. The contract wasn't just legal, it was spiritual. She had tried to bury me under stories, and instead, she stood alone in the ruins of her own creation. Later that week, I began untangling the life she'd wrapped around us. I changed account names, cancelled subscriptions she used, wrote formal notices to friends and family. We're parting ways. No drama. Just distance. That was enough to silence the curiosity, but not the whispers. Because truth, even when untold, has weight. I left the photos out of it. No need. I knew her version of events would unravel without me lifting a finger. The woman who once prided herself on being 5 steps ahead had tripped over her own lies, and now had nothing left but echoes. She tried to text once. Days later. Just wanted to know if you're okay. I didn't reply. Sometimes revenge isn't an explosion. Sometimes it's the sound of nothing, where there once was control. Sometimes it's an empty inbox, where a manipulator expects emotion. And sometimes, the cruelest thing you can do is leave them with only the truth they tried to bury. She moved out 2 days later. Not with a bang. No slamming doors, no screaming matches, no sobbing confessions in the hallway. Just cardboard boxes filled with the life she curated, bags of curated guilt and curated intentions. Her toothbrush, her hairdryer, the stack of recipe books she never used but kept for appearance. I let her pack without interruption. When she turned to say goodbye, it wasn't the apology I was expecting. It was worse. I hope someday you'll forgive me. That sentence is a trap. It makes her the one still worth something. I didn't reply. I nodded once, out of civility, not closure. Then I watched the door shut behind her. There are sounds the heart registers more deeply than the mind, the hush after someone leaves your space for the last time. The ghost of perfume that hangs in the air a moment too long. The click of a doorknob returning to neutral. These things mark finality in ways words never do. I walked through the house and let my fingers graze what she left behind. Not to remember her, but to confirm she was finally gone. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of breath, like the house had been holding it for months, waiting for her presence to dissolve. I slept that night in the center of the bed. No defensive positioning, no careful negotiation of space, no waiting for accusations in the dark. Just stillness. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was the absence of surveillance. The knowledge that I no longer had to explain myself for simply existing. She called once more the next week. I saw her name on the screen and let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail. She never did again. I imagine she still tells people I was the one who left her. That I gave up. That I changed. People like her don't confess, they rewrite. And honestly, I don't care. Let her craft her stories. The truth lives in that envelope. The one I still keep, sealed now, not for revenge, but for memory. Not of her, but of me. Of the man who once doubted his sanity in the face of projection. The man who almost apologized for being faithful. The man who, instead of screaming, listened, and then watched her unravel with her own thread. There's no victory song. No smug declaration. Only this. She built a war to cover her betrayal. I left her standing alone on the battlefield. And in the silence that followed, I found peace. Letting someone go isn't always about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about setting a trap in their own silence, and watching them step into it, over and over, thinking they're still in control. After she moved out, I didn't talk about what happened. I let the world assume what it wanted. That silence became the most strategic weapon I had. Because she couldn't stand it. People expected drama, neighbors, mutual friends, co-workers. And when it didn't come from me, she panicked. Started telling versions. First it was, he was emotionally distant. Then, he had issues he never addressed. Finally, he was cheating, I just know it. But every time she pushed the story, she only made herself look worse. Because no one believed a man who remained quiet, respectful, and grounded could be hiding something that big. I made sure of it. I began reshaping the narrative through subtle, public grace. I donated to a local youth center, volunteered at weekend programs, took a few leadership roles in community spaces we used to attend together. I never badmouthed her. I never mentioned her name. But every time someone asked how I was doing, I smiled and said, "Getting better every day. Sometimes things fall apart to make space for peace." And people remembered that. They remembered me. Meanwhile, she tried to maintain appearances. Posted carefully curated photos. Posed with cocktails and new friends. But I knew how to read between the filters, and so did others. One day, a mutual acquaintance told me at a dinner party, "She looks like she's chasing something she can't catch." I didn't respond. Just nodded, folded my napkin, and offered to refill someone's wine. Then came the opportunity one didn't expect, but recognized immediately as a gift. A colleague at my firm mentioned her name casually, said she was applying for a PR contract with one of our partner brands. The same brand whose VP I coached through his divorce 6 months ago. A man who trusted me deeply. A man who hated dishonesty. So I did what any honest man would do. I sent a short email. "Just a heads up, there may be some complications around public perception. Happy to share more in person if needed." I never said her name. But it didn't matter. The next week, she lost the contract. 3 days later, I got a call from her number. I didn't answer. Because some revenge doesn't require fire. It just needs memory. And precision. When I walked into that gala alone, wearing the tuxedo she once begged me to buy for future events, I knew exactly what I was doing. And more importantly, so did everyone else. It had been weeks since we separated, but this was the first time I appeared at a major public event solo. People whispered at first, then approached cautiously. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others thinly veiled curiosity. I gave them all the same thing: poise. "She and I are on different paths now," I'd say calmly. "I just want peace for both of us." That sentence was a dagger dressed in silk. Because while I asked for peace, she craved noise, attention, sympathy, control. She couldn't understand why no one was taking her side. Why her friends didn't repost her sad quotes or comment under her selfies. Why her coworkers started avoiding any mention of her name. Because silence is contagious, and I had become its patient zero. Behind the scenes, I made sure every thread she'd once pulled was now knotted. A friend who once defended her publicly reached out to me privately. "I had no idea how deep it all went. You've handled it like a gentleman." He didn't ask for details. I didn't offer them. But just like that, her last defender stepped away. I started quietly mentoring a junior associate, bright, driven, honest. The kind of person my ex would have called boring. I invited her to a networking event, introduced her to people my ex used to orbit. Watched as doors opened that used to be closed. At one point, someone asked, "Weren't you married?" "I was," I said. "But I'm not someone's husband anymore. I'm someone's future." That line spread like wildfire. Not because it was cruel, but because it was elegant. Meanwhile, her name came up less and less. When it did, it wasn't attached to praise. It was followed by sighs, slow shakes of the head, or that subtle pause people give when they're deciding whether to speak truth or offer mercy. I didn't need to expose her. I simply needed to keep being the man she tried to unmake, and let that contrast do the work. She tried to revive her reputation. She hosted a healing dinner with a few mutual friends. Half didn't show. Those who did, they left early. One texted me afterward. "It felt like a monologue, not a healing." And so her narrative collapsed inward, like a star running out of fuel. She was no longer the vibrant woman people admired. She was the echo of someone who used to be listened to. She had built her world on performance, and now the stage was empty. And the audience? Already watching a different story unfold. The last thread to sever was the one she valued most: attention. She could survive losing money. Her resumes spun gaps into sabbaticals. She could survive losing friends. New crowds appear when you flash enough charisma. But she couldn't survive irrelevance. She needed an audience the way most people need air. So I removed the stage lighting, quietly, efficiently, irrevocably. It began with a simple spreadsheet. I listed every social circle she curated: the philanthropic brunch club, the yoga and wine Thursdays, the influencer book group she hosted mainly for photo content, the seasonal charity board she joined for press clippings. Then I wrote one line beside each: remove positive reinforcement. Not sabotage, not rumor, simply the absence of applause. I knew the key holders in those groups, people who trusted my discretion. One by one, I met them for coffee, shared measured truths. I'm stepping back from events for personal reasons. I'd appreciate if we keep things low-key, she needs space. No dirt, no drama. Just a polite request wrapped in genuine concern. Politeness is contagious. Soon everyone decided silence was the kindest response. Next came her online halo. She lived for curated posts, perfectly angled latte art, jogger selfies captioned, "Strong women run their own race." I never liked or commented again. Our mutuals followed suit, not by conspiracy, but by inertia. Without engagement, her algorithmic reach waned, brands paused collaborations, invitations dried like spilled wine on summer pavement. She ramped up frequency, 3 posts a day, long paragraphs about resilience and heartbreak, but each sank faster than the last, scrolling into oblivion beneath sponsored fitness supplements and political memes. Still, she clung to Unit 3C, the secret loft that had once thrilled her with stolen afternoons. I let her. Because I'd rerouted the building's package logs to my email, every flower delivery from her lover, every late-night Uber Eats order. I never intercepted, never confronted. I simply compiled. When the lease renewal notice arrived, I forwarded it anonymously to his wife. A brief line. "Thought you might want to know where your household budget is going." 2 days later, the lover vacated. Unit 3C went dark. Another stage light out. Her final refuge was the narrative of betrayal she polished to a mirror. He cheated, he lied, he abandoned me. She sprinkled it in new friend groups like confetti, hoping sparkle might hide the emptiness. But confetti only glitters under light, and I'd already dimmed the room. Without validation, her story mutated, first into subtle bitterness, then into open complaint, finally into weary self-pity. People stopped replying, invitations evaporated, even her mother started suggesting therapy instead of sympathy. That was when I mailed her the box. No return address, just her name printed neatly. Inside, a single item, the wedding photo she once kept on her desk, now reframed. The original glass had cracked in transit, fissures spiderwebbing across our smiling faces. Behind the photo lay one sheet of paper, blank except for 13 words typed dead center. Some stories end without villains. Sometimes the audience simply leaves the theater. No threats, no signatures. Nothing she could weaponize. Just a fractured image of what used to be and a sentence she couldn't spin into blame. I never heard from her again. Weeks turned to months. I finished the paperwork on the house transfer, refinanced under my name, painted the bedroom a color she once said she hated. The silence in those walls felt deliberate, curated by absence, alive. I adopted a rescue dog, learned to cook without checking my phone, rediscovered the pleasure of reading until 2 a.m. because no one was texting accusations about who I was with. Occasionally, I'd cross paths with someone who still followed her online. They'd mention she'd gone offline for a bit. That she was focusing on herself. I nodded, offered no details. In private, I wished her exactly what she had earned, a room full of mirrors and all the time in the world to study the reflections. Revenge, in the end, wasn't the evidence cache locked on my hard drive. It wasn't the silent contract she signed under fluorescent legal lighting. It wasn't even the social frost that settled over her curated life like a late-season blizzard. Revenge was the realization that she no longer held a single hook in my skin, that every accusation she'd flung at me circled back and pinned itself to her own story like rusted darts. She had wanted a dramatic collapse. I gave her erosion, slow, inevitable, endless. A life built on projections hollowed from within until only the shell remained, echoing with her own unanswered questions. And me? I stepped out of the theater, brushed popcorn from my lapel, and walked into open air. The night the decree arrived, official dissolution, assets finalized, names untethered, I opened a window and let the paper's edge catch the breeze. I didn't frame it, didn't file it under triumph. I simply watched it flutter under the lamplight, a moth of bureaucracy, proof that even legally, the story was done. No applause followed. Only the soft hum of a refrigerator, the steady breath of a dog at my feet, and the vast, unresolved quiet of a future that belonged entirely to me. And that quiet, unbroken, unquestioned, undesired by anyone but me, was louder than any victory song her accusations could have sung. The first morning I woke up alone and didn't feel panic was a Sunday. The light came in softly, brushing the sheets in gold. The kind of light I used to associate with hangovers and damage control. But that morning, it just meant coffee. Silence. A clean shirt. No explanations. No surveillance. Just air and time and a clear mind. I poured a cup of black coffee. No oat milk, no cinnamon sticks, no performative breakfast arrangement for Instagram. Just coffee. I sat by the window and let it go cold, reading a paperback I'd never gotten past chapter 2 because she said it was pretentious. I liked it. I underlined entire paragraphs. One line stopped me. You don't heal by returning. You heal by becoming someone who no longer needs to. That line stayed with me longer than the bitterness of the coffee. I started writing again. Not memoirs, not revenge fantasies. Just thoughts. Observations. Quiet truths that didn't need an audience. At first I kept them in a password-protected document, like they were evidence. But over time, I stopped locking the file. I had nothing left to hide. From her. From anyone. I walked past places we used to haunt, wine bars, bookstores, lobbies of hotels we never stayed in but liked to pretend we could afford, and I didn't feel haunted. They were just locations. The ghost had no grip anymore. My memories weren't poisoned. They were just folded away. Like old maps. Still accurate, but irrelevant to where I was now going. People asked about her less and less. One close friend, after a long dinner, finally said, I always thought she was charming. But I see it now. How much space she took. How much quieter you are, stronger even, without her. That wasn't revenge. That was relief. A rare kind that seeps into your bones slowly, like warm water after a frost. Work stabilized. Finances steadied. I no longer had to check charges or justify large withdrawals labeled as emergency spa sessions. I started sleeping through the night. Not because I was tired, but because my body finally believed it was safe. I didn't date for a while. Not out of fear. But because I wanted to be sure I wasn't carrying poison into someone else's garden. I wanted to be a man who didn't just survive betrayal, but rebuilt without residue. Eventually, I met someone. But that's not her story. And it's not mine to tell here. What mattered was this. One day, I caught myself laughing. Deep, careless, full-chested. The kind of laugh that comes from something stupid, a dog chasing its tail, or an autocorrect fail. I laughed, and then I paused. Not because it felt strange, but because it didn't. I was laughing like someone who had nothing left to prove. And in that moment, I realized the story had ended long ago. Not when the lies were uncovered. Not when she moved out. Not even when the divorce was signed. The story ended the moment I stopped asking why. And started living in the what now. The hardest part of healing isn't the pain. It's the emptiness that follows once pain lets go. Pain, at least, is loud. It fills the room. It gives your brain something to solve, some place to aim its fire. But when pain finally goes quiet, what's left is silence, and in that silence, a mirror. Not of her. Of me. Of who I was when I let it all happen. Of the man who clung too tightly to dignity in the face of humiliation. Of the man who mistook manipulation for passion. Of the man who, for too long, believed that loyalty meant staying even after the roof had caved in and the floor rotted under his feet. I had to face him. And I did. Slowly. Quietly. Without shame, but without denial. I forgave myself for not seeing sooner. For excusing the tone in her voice, the messages that came at odd hours, the sudden coldness followed by forced warmth. I forgave myself for being the kind of man who wanted so badly for love to work that he ignored every sign it already had failed. I went back through our texts once, just once. Not for closure, but to test something. I wanted to see if they still hurt. And when I read her oldest accusation, "You're hiding something. I can feel it." I felt nothing. No rage. No sorrow. No spark. Just words. Just digital dust. She had tried to define me with suspicion, and I had let her. Now, I read those same lines like a historian studying a ruin, curious, distanced, incapable of bleeding from it again. Then I deleted them. All of them. Not in a rush. Not with a bitter smile. Just with a kind of reverence, like burying something that once lived but no longer had a pulse. And then came something unexpected. Peace, yes, but more than that, space. Space in my days. Space in my thoughts. Space in my calendar where apologies used to go. I started traveling. Nothing dramatic. Just weekends. A cabin with no signal. A road trip with the windows down and no destination set in Google Maps. I rediscovered the feeling of not being tracked. Not being managed. Not being prejudged. I remembered what it meant to choose without calculating another person's reaction. I said yes to things again. Dinners with people who didn't need gossip to function. Hikes with no time limit. Books I'd put down because she once said, "You're not really the literary type." I reclaimed preferences like property returned after wrongful seizure. And in that reclamation, I found something I didn't expect. Not just freedom. Not just clarity. But gratitude. Not for her. But for what came after her. The quiet. The rebuilding. The self-respect I rebuilt from the ground up, brick by brick, without borrowed hands or borrowed lies. I didn't become colder. I became cleaner. And when people said I seemed different, I smiled, not because I'd changed, but because I'd finally stopped pretending. I no longer dream about her. That was the last milestone, the quietest one. It came without fanfare, just a slow realization over several weeks that she no longer wandered into my sleep, no longer hijacked memories, no longer lingered in the corners of rooms I once avoided. She was gone from my unconscious as thoroughly as she'd been erased from my phone, my walls, my voice. And it felt like waking up from a fever you didn't know you had. What remained was not some victorious echo, not some anthem of survival I replayed to prove I'd won. What remained was something far more intimate, an unshakable sense that I was whole again. And not because someone new had stitched me back together. No. Because I did. With my own hands over many quiet, brutal mornings. There's a chair in my living room now where I do nothing but sit. That's it. I don't scroll, I don't plan, I don't reminisce. I sit. And that small act, sitting without expectation, without fear someone will accuse me of wasting time, or demand attention for a manufactured crisis, is the most sacred part of my day. It's a declaration. I owe nothing to ghosts. The people who know me now know me. Not the version of me that played the supporting role in someone else's endless drama, but the one who emerged after. They don't ask about her. They don't need to. Her chapter is closed, filed under lessons, not loss. I learned from her. That doesn't make her a teacher. That makes me a student who finally walked out of the wrong classroom. Sometimes I still get questions, usually from those who only heard fragments. Wasn't it messy? Didn't you two love each other? How did you move on so fast? And I always give the same answer, not to be coy, but because it's the only one that's true. I didn't move on fast. I just stopped circling the same fire. Love doesn't always rot because of hate. Sometimes it dies quietly, strangled by the hands that claim to protect it. That's what happened. not a grand betrayal. Just 1,000 micro cuts of manipulation, condescension, emotional ambush. By the time she crossed the line had already blurred. But now I know the signs. I know my limits. And I guard them not like walls, but like gates, with locks I hold and keys I never give away again lightly. If I were to meet her in public now, I wouldn't flinch. I wouldn't sneer. I wouldn't ask how she's doing. I'd nod, once. Polite. Final. Because she is no longer a threat. She is no longer anything. Not because I diminished her, but because I expanded beyond her. And that is the real end. Not the ink on the divorce. Not the absence of her name in my mouth. Not even the reclaimed peace. The end is when I stop needing to explain. And the beginning? That's every morning I wake up, stretch into silence, pour my coffee, and remember. I was never hers to break. Only mine to rebuild. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to Betrayal and Revenge, give us a like, and hit the bell so you won't miss new tales. Share your thoughts in the comments, I value your feedback. See you in the next stories of Betrayal and Revenge.